By now, I hope you have read Atticus's closing arguments, and in this assignment from last week, we asked you to really analyze his ethos, his pathos, and his logos. Um, so I hope you have done that. And if you haven't, you're not going to be able to do today's assignment because it links directly back to this speech that Atticus gives at the end of all the testimony. And so, as a reminder, in this closing argument, Atticus again brings up the fact that Mayella, acts like a child. We can't trust her. Um, and he brings up this idea of like the time honored code that she broke, right? And we determined that that code, that thing that she broke, was this idea of separate but equal, right? That the races are not supposed to mix. And since Tom Robinson was the only person who was ever nice to her, and she was pretty much the loneliest person Scout has ever seen, um, Atticus builds this argument that like Mayella like appreciated the affection she got from Tom. She appreciated the attention. He was the only person who was ever nice to her. Um, but she was not equally nice to him, right? When she got caught, she blamed him. Or her and her father came up with this brilliant idea that they would just blame Tom Robinson for what had happened. And so Atticus goes through that again, and he talks about how Mayella was savagely beaten by someone who led mostly or exclusively with his left hand. And Tom Robinson takes the oath using the only good hand he possesses, his right hand. So logically, it is impossible for Tom Robinson to have committed this crime against Mayella. And Atticus talks more, I'm in paragraph 4 now, or section 4. Atticus talks a lot about how Tom Robinson is a humble man and he should not be lumped into this idea that all Negroes are not to be trusted. And Atticus reminds the jury that that is something that is true of all men, not just black men.
Where's my hand?
I don't know. And so he goes down here, and the last thing that he does is he brings up the United States Constitution, right? This idea that all men are created equal. And we know that there are a lot of places where men are not equal, right? And Atticus goes through them like some men are smart, some men have money, ladies bake different kinds of cakes, blah, blah, blah. All right, but according to Atticus, the number one place where people should be equal, where the laws should work, is in the court system, right? And so Atticus's idea is that the courts should be the great leveler of all men. And it's the place where they can really uphold that belief that all men are created equal. And as he leaves, he asks the men of the jury, because remember, there's just 12 white men. There are no women, there are no black men. 12 white men. He asks them, he begs them to do their duty, to think about how this case is going to matter later and how it can really make a difference. So that's kind of the overview of Atticus's closing arguments. Today, if you haven't done this first assignment, you need to do this one first. The second one is 4 follow-up questions that go with the closing arguments. Okay, these questions need to be answered in complete sentences with proper conventions like periods, quotation marks, and I need you to check your spelling. You need to run a spell check on this document. You're getting a using language grade for these responses, which means I'm specifically looking at how you use language. So the first one is, after reading the closing arguments, what is Atticus's most powerful point? Explain if it's an example of ethos, pathos, or logos. So you will need to come back to the closing arguments themselves. You will need to pull out a piece of textual evidence in quotation marks, and you will need to put it on this document. So for example, the most powerful point Atticus makes is when he says quotation marks. This is an example of blank because. Okay. Each of these responses should be 5 to 8 sentences in length with the use of textual evidence in at least the first three. The second question, analyzing Atticus's audience. Who makes up the jury? I just told you the answer. And based on what you know about the time period, explain the verdict that this jury will most likely come to. And do you think there's anything that Atticus could have said or done to change their minds? And explain. So again, you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to pull out a piece of evidence that supports what you think. And now for the third question, you will put yourself on the jury. And knowing what you know, having heard all of the testimony that you've heard, how would you vote for Tom Robinson? Would you vote guilty or not guilty? And what evidence has helped you make this decision? So you can choose evidence that's specifically in the closing arguments. I think there's a lot of great pieces there. Or if you're thinking of something else, you can go back and pull it from the other chapters or the testimonies that you've looked at. And the last thing that we want you to do today is we want you to view the film version of the closing arguments. The link is right here on YouTube. It should be approved for you to watch. It won't take very long. But there is something magical in Gregory Peck, and the reason why this movie has not been remade. So I really want you to watch the closing arguments and think about how hearing them, how speech affects the closing arguments and their effectiveness. Okay. How does hearing these words and like being able to put a face to Tom Robinson and to Atticus, how does that change their effectiveness? And which appeal do you think is most impacted by these closing arguments and why? So is it ethos, pathos, or logos? You need to explain. All of these should include an explanation. And again, you should be writing in your best, almost 10th grade sentences as you get a using language grade for this assignment. If you have questions or you want to talk about any of this, Mr. D and I will be on with Miss Miller from 10:30 to 11 on Monday. So I wish you luck. And if you need anything in the meantime, feel free to email.